Assembly Police, and hashtag Stop and Search. Please make sure that your mobile phones are switched to silent mode to avoid any unnecessary interruptions this morning. So the first of the agenda is apologies for absence and chair's announcement. Can I now ask our clerk, Teresa Young, if any apologies have been received for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from the committee's chairman, Assembly Member O'Connell, and also from Assembly Member Duval, and today Assembly Member Devonish is substituting for Assembly Member O'Connell.
Okay. Second item, declaration of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2? And can I also ask Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests and other relevant interests, including any declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality which are not reflected on the authority's register of gifts and hospitality, where they relate to the items of the agenda for today's meeting? Agenda item 3 is summary list of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the completed, closed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the committee and the additional correspondence? Thank you. So the main item on agenda, today's business, stop and search. Can I firstly welcome our guests? And perhaps we could start off by you introducing yourselves. If I can start with yourself, Neena.
Good morning and thank you very much. My name is Neena Samota. I'm here in my capacity as a trustee for StopWatch and also as an academic teaching criminology and sociology at St. Mary's University. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Von Bance and I'm a peer outreach worker at City Hall.
Hi, my name is Derreem Huggins. I'm also a peer outreach worker here at City Hall.
Hello, my name is Oluwatosin Adegoke. I'm a team leader at Hackney CVS.
Good morning, my name is Deji Adeoshun. I'm the Youth Leadership Manager at Hackney CVS and I've been coordinating the Youth Monitoring Group now for the last 6 years.
Okay. Well, we've got a number of questions to ask of you. It is your show today, so as I said, it's a formal meeting, it will be recorded, but do feel it is. We want to listen to your experiences. My colleagues will come in at various stages, but if I can kick off. So the first section is changes in the use of stop and search. And if I can ask you, Jay, Derreem and Oluwatosin, about your experiences of the way that officers carry out stop and search. So, Jay, do you want to come in? Your own experiences?
Yeah. Well, my experience personally has been quite bad, if I'm entirely honest. I feel like a lot of young people in quite crime-ridden areas are quite stereotyped. So you may grow up in an area which has a high knife crime rate, for example, but may not be a part of that percentage of people involved in that crime. But because you're growing up in that environment, you're still being prosecuted as one of those people. So, for example, there was a point in my life where on my way to school I was getting stopped every single morning. So it made me feel like I had to take a different route to school just because I didn't want to get stopped and for it to affect my journey. And once you do get stopped, it makes you feel quite powerless. You feel like there's nothing you can do, you can't get away or anything, you just know you have to just face it. So there's a point where I think young people, they might not have nothing on them, but they just feel they run away or they don't want to be in that situation again, so it makes them feel like they want to avoid it or try to run away.
So can I ask you, when did this take place, or what time period, which part of London?
South London.
Right, and over what time period?
About a year ago, when I was getting stopped every morning, when I was going to school still, yeah. So I finished school a year ago.
Whereabouts in South London?
Peckham.
My experience, or one of my experiences, in my local area, I was stopped because they said I looked suspicious, but I didn't find I looked suspicious. I didn't have a hood on, I wasn't wearing anything which may have made me look suspicious. And when they stop you, you almost feel, even though you don't have anything on your person that may be incriminating, you lose a sense of your self-worth in a way, because it's like they're almost telling you that you're a bad person, telling you, oh look, you look like this, or you're moving in a certain way, and when you question it, they don't give you enough clarification on the things you have done. So it just makes you feel, like Jay said, powerless. just really not in a position where you feel like you're a normal citizen, really. And my area is Finsbury Park.
Finsbury Park.
Yeah, Finsbury Park, North London, Islington.
And again, how long back was this? Or what time period? How many weeks, months?
This was, I think, about the ending of 2017. So I believe it to be about mid-December 2017.
So for my experiences that have taken place in Hackney, I can only speak of my experiences being stopped from 3 years ago, because I haven't been in London for the last 3 years. And then my experience with sort of being reintegrated in Hackney for over the last 3 or 4 months. So I'm going to start.
So attempting, I personally feel like they was attempting to provoke a reaction from me, which I didn't give into and react. I just kind of walked off and carried on with my day, but I don't feel like that's acceptable.
Mm. I mean, you talked about the experience with your friends. We put questions to senior officers over the last few months. Complaints seem to have gone down, for instance. But I mean, obviously, you're saying that that's still continuing from the experience of your friends and so on. Can you shed any light on that? Why the police tell us one thing?
Slow down, sorry?
As far as the police are concerned, complaints are going down?
Complaints?
Yeah, about stop and search or misuse of powers or stop and search?
I don't think the complaints have gone down because there's been a lower rate of the things that the police doing wrong are committing. I think the complaints have gone down because they don't feel like no action will be taken if we do complain.
Mm. I mean, there are various tests done by the police, College of Policing and so on. I won't go into all that, but they're meant to do certain things. I mean, so when you were stopped, Jay, were you told why you were being searched?
Yeah, it could be different things on different occasions. So one time it could be that the knife crime rate is high in this area, so we're obliged to search you. Mm-hmm. Another thing could be like someone was robbed around the corner, someone was robbed on this road here, and you match the description, for example. I think that's quite a common one. So I think sometimes it's quite hard to believe when they say that, because you think, do I really match the description of someone that's just been robbed around the corner? So.
Mm. And your experience?
Everything that they just said, I agree with, because there's no specification on exactly what they're going to stop you for. They could tell you anything, and they make it sound in a way where we have the right to search you now. Because of what we just told you, we have the right to search you. And if you don't know your rights, it's a lot harder to speak up for yourself and stand up for yourself. You was talking about friends and if they've been through similar situations. I could say yes, because one time I went to my friend's house, and he lives in an estate which is really bad in northwest London, and we stepped out his house to go to the shop, and as soon as we stepped out his house, a police car was driving past, and they drove past and they looked at us, and then they circled back and came to us and they stopped us, saying that there was this crime just at the top of the road, and we matched the description. But when we said to them, we just stepped out of the house, we haven't gone nowhere, we just came outside to go shop, they're saying, well, we still have to search you because of what has happened up the road. And at the time I didn't know as many rights as I do now, and we just let them search us. But we felt like we can't even go anywhere, we can't go to the shop if we wanted to, we can't attend, we can't just walk down the road casually, basically. And it doesn't help when you know that there are some police out there that's actually trying to do good for the community. So
yeah, I think in short, they move with great authority and little clarity. Mm-hmm. And you're not really made clear of why you're being stopped. But even once you are told something, it's sort of such a convoluted description that it doesn't really make sense to you, but you just accept it. On top of that, I didn't even know that you can refuse to accept being searched, which is another and have a bit of information that is not really given to you, which should be given to you, which is sort of the responsibility of the officers. So in that sense, there's also sort of diverting from their true responsibility.
Okay, just moving on. I did touch upon the issue of complaints, but one of my colleagues will come in later on to ask a more specific question. If I can come to you, Neena and Deji. So Neena and Deji, I'll start with you, Neena. You contributed to the committee's last investigation to stop and search, which I think was in 2014. What, if anything, has changed in the way the police use their stop and search powers over the past 5 years?
Thank you. I'd like to just put that into context of the work that StopWatch do. We are a coalition of academics, lawyers, and civil society organizations, young people, and community stakeholders. And our aim is to promote fair and effective and accountable policing. Since 2010, we have campaigned against disproportionate use of stop and search, the use of exceptional stop and search powers, and also the weakening of associated accountability mechanisms. So I welcome the opportunity actually to provide evidence to this committee 5 years on from 2014. That period marked a high point in the reform of the use of stop and search powers and led to some useful changes. Police forces across England and Wales, including the Met, appeared to reduce the numbers of stops and searches year on year. However, claims made of targeted searches, intelligence-led searches, evidence-led searches, powers used with reasonable suspicion applied accurately have not actually amounted to improving the effectiveness of stop and search, and that really is the key here. In some ways, things have actually moved backwards. For example, at the end of last year, police chiefs were calling for the expansion of stop and search powers by lowering the threshold for the suspicion required to use the power. These calls to lower reasonable grounds is profoundly misguided and detrimental to the legitimacy of the principle of policing by consent. We have just heard some of these young men talk about that. Existing evidence indicates that reasonable suspicion is not a sufficient safeguard against misuse, and diluting this requirement leaves it open to abuse and also widens discretion. Surely, this type of thinking is a step in the wrong direction. Also, this represents a significant U-turn in government thinking, while in 2014, Theresa May, then Home Secretary, said that in relation to effectiveness, stop and search was a dreadful waste of police time, conducting pointless stops and searches with all the bureaucracy that goes with them. Nobody wins when stop and search is misapplied. It is a waste of police time. It is unfair, especially to young black men. It is bad for public confidence in the police too. Now, Sajid Javid demonstrates no such concerns and wishes to ensure that not only will he make it easier for police officers to be able to use the powers to stop and search, but also to reduce bureaucracy around it. That is worrying. Since your last committee report of 2014, ethnic disproportionality has been the highest it has ever been since records began. Our recent report, The Colour of Injustice, published by StopWatch more recently, the use of stop and search has fallen sharply, dropping by 75% from 2010-11 to 2016-2017 period, where 1.5 million stop and searches that were conducted in 2008 and 9 now have dropped to 300,000 in 2017-18, so a significant drop. Disproportionality has in fact increased and the use of stop and search has fallen, indicating that residual use of the powers is more heavily concentrated on black and minority ethnic groups. Black people are now stopped and searched for any reason at more than 8 times the rate of whites. Black people are 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched for drugs, despite using drugs at a lower rate compared to white people. And similarly, arrests for drugs as a result of stop and search fell by 52% for white people between 2010 and 2011 and 2016-17 period, but did not fall at all for black people. Black people are prosecuted and convicted for cannabis possession at 11 and 12 times the rate of white people. Note that this is the statistic for possession of cannabis rather than the supply for Class A and B drugs combined. The point is that knife crime, gangs, or serious youth violence are such serious issues, then if they are such serious issues, how come police are still spending a disproportionate amount of time and their powers policing vulnerable groups for low-level drug possession. So that should be noted. London data in particular highlights high rates of stop and search and indicates that that is a driver for ethnic disproportionality because into the criminal justice system, because a large proportion of these groups are resident also in the capital. Overall, the rates of stop and search are higher among inner than outer London boroughs. The variations between boroughs are strongly linked to levels of deprivation, and overall rates of stop and search are highest in the more deprived boroughs with considerable inequality. So rates of stop and search appear to be more sensitive to deprivation and inequality rather than crime. And I'll turn to that in a later discussion around the use of Section 60 as well. So I think there are patterns that are fueling the disproportionality levels from back then. I think we have made a step backwards rather than a move forward in any positive direction.
There's a lot there. We do have a specific section on disproportionality, Section 60, community engagement coming up as well. But I didn't want to stop you in full flow. Deji, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think Neena has outlined excellently, you know, in terms of the statistics and some of the feelings that's been happening since 2014. To be honest with you, I would say not much has really changed. We talked a lot 5 years ago in terms of some of the recommendations that we wanted to implement, especially being more active in the community. And actually what we've seen is a dip, and that dip has happened because the police would often say there's a lack of resources, so they're not able to engage in kind of the community stuff. But actually it's the community engagement that helps with policing. You know, if you have a good relationship with your community, then there's a better feeling with officers, there's a better feeling with the community. That's gone. We hardly see officers coming into the community and taking that time out. They're more reactive. And when you have more reactive officers, that creates tension. And so there's a lot of tension on the ground. Young people don't feel safe. And I think we had a big incident that you all know about that happened with Rashawn Charles. And, you know, and there is that sense that, you know, could I be next? You know, some people have said that. And, you know, and what do I need to do to protect myself? In fact, the latest quote is that the biggest gang is the police. And actually, that's quite disappointing to hear, actually. And I think that a trick was missed, actually, in the last report, especially around the kind of community engagement piece. And that's been really, the police excuse for that has really been that their numbers has reduced. And it is acknowledged that it has been reduced, but something needs to be done to kind of keep that going. In terms of, yes, we have seen the number of searches reduced. Young people are not reporting that they've been stopped and searched as regularly as they was, for example, in 2011 or 2012. But also within that same period, one of the things that we wanted to do is look at confidence in police and actually do a piece of work to kind of survey what on the ground, how do people feel? Because the reports would often suggest that the confidence in policing is quite high, actually. I think for Hackney it's like 70%. But actually when we've unpicked that, that's 300 people who happen to pick up their landline telephone. I mean, I don't know how many people have landlines. I don't know anymore. So, you know, are they actually getting to the right people and asking the right people questions? That's a piece of work that we wanted to do. That hasn't happened. We would want to, I believe that would unpick and get more accurate information in relation to police confidence. Visibility has diminished. We don't see police as often as we should. Therefore, young people don't feel safe. And if young people don't feel safe, then you're seeing you're seeing the repercussions of that in some of the knife crime that is going on in the capital at the moment. So, you know, in essence, I would say we really haven't moved forward, and I echo Neena's point, actually. It does feel that we are going backwards.
I can see some of our colleagues want to come in. So, Susan.
Just a quick one. Do youngsters feel safe then when they see the police?
Yes, they do. I mean, there's a difference. So with stop and search, the issue has always been about how the stop and search was carried out and the conduct of officers. And like you said, like these young men have said, the provocation doesn't always help. But actually seeing officers just being present and allowing and being there, and yeah, the young people do feel safe. It's nice to see officers there. One young person said to me, look, if there were two rival individuals, as it were, and there was an officer there, nothing would happen. But actually things happen when there's no police. And it's that simple. So actually they want to see more officers, but they want to see less stop and search as well.
Could I add something to that as well? I feel like if the officer are in presence, I think they should be doing more rather than just patrolling the area. So in terms of just talking about them having a better relationship with the community, so I feel like if police are present, I feel like the majority of youth just feel like they're only patrolling with the intention of stopping people rather than doing things in the community. So if there was that presence to prevent rival people or crime being committed in the area, I think they should actually be doing things in the community, specific things. So doing work in the community centres or entering shops or doing anything rather than just patrolling up and down the road looking for people to stop.
On stop and searches, very often knives are taken off the streets, which obviously makes you safer. What do you think about that? I mean, because whilst they may stop people that haven't got knives or anything else, thousands of knives have been taken off the street because of stop and search. Young black lads are more likely to be victims than any other groups. So with less knives on the streets, do you not think that then makes you safer?
I think it's actually a thing where you need to change the mindset of the youth rather than just continuously punishing them, because if someone feels like they have to, for them to feel safe, they need to carry a knife on them when they step on the street. I don't think a punishment, the knife being taken away from them and them being given a charge, is big enough for someone to think, okay, I'm going to change my mindset now, and now I'm going to stop carrying a knife.
Okay, we'll come into that.
Yeah, I think in this session, what I want to do is get your experiences out, but we will be coming to later on as to how to go forward. Neena.
I was simply going to come back to, yeah.
Any other colleagues? Before I come to Caroline. I just got a couple of questions before I hand over to Caroline Pigeon. I mean, the three of Jay, Derreem and Oluwatosin, so when you were stopped, I mean, from what you said, as I understand you, you were stopped, searched, but I mean, nothing else happened after that. I mean, did the police write to you or did they correspond or?
And after at a later date?
Yeah, I mean, you were just stopped and searched and there was no further action of any type?
Not my experience.
Not experiences. But has it changed your outlook? I mean, when you see a police officer, so you spoke about Peckham, Hackney and Finsbury Park. I know it's a year on now, more or less, but has it changed your perception of when you see a police officer out in the street or police van or whatever? Does it make you feel safer or
I think
apprehensive?
What's important to note, which might touch on the previous speaker's point, is that despite the many knives that have been taken off the streets, if a knife hasn't been taken from me, I'm not really going to be aware of how safe I should feel because of how many knives have been taken off the street. The only thing that will affect my perception of safety or my perception of being at home is what I experience when I get stopped. And so I'm saying that the statistics of the many knives that have been taken off the street is all good and well, and that's amazing. But my fundamental experience is that of being unwarrantedly stopped, and therefore I won't feel at ease in my own community.
Yeah, I agree because now my perception hasn't really changed. Yeah, it's good to see like police in the area, but if a police officer looks at me, I try to avoid eye contact because I feel like it's gonna give him a reason for him to come and stop and search me. And I haven't done anything wrong. I know I haven't done anything. I haven't, and I'm just a person walking past. But I would avoid the eye contact because I think when they look at you, they assess you in that split second. Especially when you make eye contact, and if you stare at them for too long, then they feel like they've got a right to come and stop you now. So, no, my perception hasn't really changed.
Yeah, I think I agree with the other three members as well. I don't feel like my perception has personally changed because I still have younger cousins and younger nephews that still experience the same things, and I've seen it with my own eyes as well. So I don't feel like there has been a change in the way the police handle it, because I've seen the same things that has happened to me a year ago or so ago happen to my younger cousins and younger family members.
Thank you. Can I hand over to you, Carla? I think you've got two specific areas that you want to talk about.
A couple of things I wanted to look at. One of the big things that has changed since we last looked at this as a committee is that body-worn video cameras have been rolled out right across the Met. So, at least in theory, every frontline officer will have a camera on them, and if they wanted to stop and search someone, they should immediately put that camera on. Have you, either personally or through people you know, had any experience of stop and search with those cameras on, and has that changed how the police behave? I don't know who would like to go first.
I personally have no experiences with that, and I have not heard of anyone with any experiences, which could either be a testimony to how ineffective it is, or a testimony to how underused it is. I'm not sure. Take it how you will.
I think the evidence we had is about 90% of stop and searches, over 90%, are being recorded. So it's a very high proportion, not 100%, which we would like, but very high proportion.
I've seen the cameras on the police officers
Yes.
when being stopped and searched, but there's been situations where I haven't seen them turn it on, or I've actually seen them turn it off. So if there was one time when I actually saw, I wasn't actually involved in this, I was walking past on my way to training and I saw there was altercation going on. The police stopped a girl, there was a girl, she was getting arrested, and everyone was aware of this because it was quite spoken about in the community. They turned it off, they put her in a van, and they was restraining her, but they was kicking her and hitting her while she was in the back of the van. And this is after turning their cameras off, and then they proceeded to bring her to the station. So I don't think it's as effective because they have the power still in their hands. They can just press it on or turn it off, and I don't think any punishment will be taken if they wasn't to turn it off.
A number of officers would be at that incident, and if they all turn their cameras off, that would be pulled out as something strange has gone on here. And if the person then reported there had been violence and so on, as you've described, that would be a very serious matter.
I mean, I know that body worn is something that's recently just been rolled out in Hackney, for example. So I think maybe within the last 12 to 9 months it's just come out. But we will have an opportunity to do some dip sampling of some body worn footage, which is a change actually.
Yeah.
They have agreed to allow us, because I think, although I haven't met any young people at the moment who have experienced that, from what I'm hearing on the ground, at least from an officer perspective, they're quite happy to have body worn because at least they feel like they've got some evidence. In terms of young people, I think they're happy, but still are wanting to record their own body, from their own mobile phones and stuff. My thing would be, they just need more information needs to be rolled out about body worn and how it works, so that people are aware. I think there's a lot of assumptions about how it works. The police are aware of these assumptions, and I think they need to do more to kind of squash some of the concerns that people do have about it, really. But I think we will have a better sense once we are able to do the dip sampling and see how it is actually working in practice.
Yeah. So,
they're not already doing that.
yeah, I thought dip sampling, and I've actually been to Hackney last year and talked to the officers there, and I thought dip sampling was just routine now. Is that not the case?
No, not yet at all.
Wow.
This is something that we've been pushing for,
Yes.
but delighted to say that now we will have an opportunity at the end of the month to do our first dip sampling session. So it hasn't happened in the last year.
And that would be your local
that
group?
Would be, yeah, local group, yeah.
Looking at that, and hopefully you can then tell the community what you found, and that might help confidence in it. I'm not saying it will solve it by any means, all the issues, but Neena, you wanted to come in?
Thank you. I was just going to add that there's been a great degree of enthusiasm about body worn cameras, and it's still mixed. And I would say we need to also tread with a little bit of caution, because when they were initially rolled out, the question really is what evidence was there, how it was, where was the evaluation in the pilots as well, and to what extent that was shared widely, what were some of the concerns back then, because there certainly is an issue, like has just been suggested, in relation to how the camera is being used, the timings of when it is being turned off and on, by the officer. There are moments or critical moments which actually miss out on the context of the contact with the person involved on the street, which is not clear. Also, what is not clear is the length of time in which the recording is actually kept and held in case of a complaint. Already we know that the trust and confidence in the complaint system is really low and poor. Added to that, using body-worn video cameras and using that as evidence, if it is only going to be kept for a certain period of time, is certainly limiting. So there are so many other issues involved in the use of body-worn cameras. Yes, it does seem to improve that, okay, there's evidence on both sides and a clear picture can emerge. We are not there yet, and I think we should treat this carefully. And at StopWatch, we are doing some work looking into this in depth, and we will be publishing a briefing on this soon, highlighting some of our concerns around the use of body-worn videos. And I totally agree with Deji, that I know that the scrutiny of the dip sampling and the scrutiny of this body-worn video footage is not currently accessible as it seems. So, access is denied routinely, that's the reason why more work needs to be done to really understand what are the legal implications, what are the boundaries within which it can be used, on what basis it can be challenged, who keeps what information, to what extent of time, so on. There's so many issues there which still remain to be uncovered. And that's not just in the Met, it's in other areas as well. So we really need to kind of track and monitor how this is proceeding.
But it has the potential to be a useful tool to help improve the quality and the use of stop and search. Would you agree?
The mayor's called it a game changer.
Yeah.
He has, and we noted that as well, and we are not convinced that it is a game changer yet, because if it is being disproportionately used, in a certain way, the manner in which it is being used, and how till such time that there's clarity in how it is being used, to what extent it can be used for challenging and monitoring, then we don't really know, and I don't think we should make kind of ideas or firm up ideas whether it's a good thing or not. Let's wait for the evidence. Yeah.
You touched on the issue of complaints, and obviously...
Karen, before you go, Shan, did you want to come in on the issue of body-worn video cameras?
No, it was just the question of whether or not it was already being dip sampled.
So we just pick that up. You've already described to us about people who've not been treated well when they've had a stop and search, your own experiences. Would people you know, or even yourself, be prepared to make a formal complaint if you felt you'd been poorly treated by the police, and particularly potentially with body-worn camera there as well? And if not, why not? What's the general feeling in perhaps the young people you know?
I don't think young people are confident that any action will be taken if they do complain. That's just simple as that. I don't think they're confident that if they do go and make that phone call or do go through, they're not going to be taken seriously, and they don't have much power. They feel powerless, like I said before. So it's just
even though it's captured, and so if you've had a really bad encounter, it's in theory at least recorded. That wouldn't encourage them.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, Derreem?
I'd agree with Jay, because in the past, so when I was about 7 years ago, I made a complaint, and nothing happened in my case. No further action was taken. They didn't tell me, they didn't get back to me about the things that the officer did or anything. A couple of other people that I know, young people that I know, they just, they don't want to make a complaint because they feel like it might, if it happens to come up in the if it happens to come up in the not precinct but the
records, you mean?
Yeah, in the records, sorry. It wouldn't be taken further. A lot of young people think that it would just get dismissed. The sergeant or whoever may tell them, "Oh, look, don't do this again," but there's no real effect or real consequence for that officer who has abused their power.
Do you think young people feel that if they did make a complaint, the police might think, right, they've complained about us and they might pick on you more?
Yeah,
is it that sort of other fear as well?
Yeah, I feel like there's they feel that they will be targeted more, because they made a complaint and they may have had been in trouble before in the past, but if they've ain't done nothing and they've tried to make a complaint, the police officer would be like, look, well, we know you, we'll just keep an eye on you now, things like that. So.
Yes, I know someone who's made a complaint, and that I didn't really go down too well. He was left unsatisfactory with the results, feeling unsatisfied with the results of the complaint. But I think with the added body camera, I think it could add more confidence. But I think it's important to note that considering the already existing poor confidence in making complaints, if something does go down and it is on body camera, because someone already lacked confidence in the complaint procedure, if it might take them a few weeks, a few days, a few months, I don't know, for them to actually summon the courage and sort of push aside their bias. At that point, is the footage still recorded? Is it even archived? Is it stored on cloud storage? Is it temporarily stored on something for like 10 days? I don't know. So you might need to make it clear how the body camera works if you are going to somehow instill confidence in members of the public.
Can I just follow on from what Caroline said? What was wrong? You know, you said it was unsatisfactory, the complaint, how it was dealt with. What happened?
That's a tricky point because it is not my testimony. So it's me hearing from a friend.
Yeah.
And
well, you can sort of mention, if you don't mention his name or whatever. I mean, do you know what happened? I mean, just
I'm
nothing
really not
happened?
sure how to explain it, I must admit. It is something that's sort of just been loosely told to me. So I can't regurgitate it because I don't know too much about it. But I just remember leaving a conversation and being like, okay, you're unsatisfied with the results of that. I'm so sorry.
No, sure. So what you're saying basically is that if you make a complaint, you might be victimised?
Could be victimised, nothing, no consequence will be taken upon the officer. Yeah.
You might want to try avoid the officer you just complained about. So if you see the officer, you might feel intimidated in some way because you've made that complaint. So you might feel like it might lead on to being victimised.
Can I just add to that, Caroline? It's actually really interesting because in theory, you know, having a complaint system, having structures is a fine thing, and absolutely we should have that. I think what is less understood or or acknowledged is the idea that what does it actually do to the complainant, because the complainant often becomes the problem. And it is borne out by evidence given to us also by young people that they in turn become the problem. They have to, like you said, Jay, avoid the police or take another route. Young people going to college, getting late for exams. What are they going to complain about? And who will they complain to? We've heard that with some young people who are on their way to college to give exam, to sit their exam. They're stopped by police, held, detained. Nothing's found on them. They enter college, they're late for the exam, they've missed. Nobody's going to give them that extra time because how are you going to explain that? And how do you make a complaint on something like that? On Monday, as StopWatch, we met with the Independent Office of Police Conduct, explained exactly the same situation. Who's responsible for that? How do we account for that part of the time taken away? Because the claims can be made on either side as valid and legitimate, but there's no resolution. So oftentimes having the complaint system where the complainant is then, posed as the problem is just so detrimental.
Yeah, just quickly, I just want to say that sometimes I do feel in relation to complaints that there's too much emphasis on wanting there to be a complaint made by members of the public, because in reality, when complaints are made, often, and as it's already been mentioned, nothing's been done, or it appears that nothing's been done. And for me, the real push here would be more transparency. If you really want to give the members of the community confidence in the police system, in the complaint system, then they need to see that things actually happen when they make a complaint. Nobody sees anything. Complaints are made. We don't know what the processes that have happened. It's not communicated back. That individual is unsatisfied. You're not really sure why they're unsatisfied, but also more importantly, how do they come to that decision? So often, the couple of complaints I've had before, it's always been knocked back as, well, this wasn't serious enough, and it needs to be something so serious. But we really need to be having members of the community almost involved, or being able to see, officers that are being reprimanded when they've done something wrong. That would give me more confidence. But at the moment, we're sitting here, I don't even know if that even takes place. I mean, I'm sure it does, but who knows when was the last time? Nobody knows. So we need more, if you want more people to come forward, then we need more transparency from the police. If not, it's just going to be the same.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we should move on now. So the second section I would ask you questions about is about community engagement, and I'll hand over to my colleague, Assembly Member Susan Hall.
Thank you. I've slightly touched on this, but what impact does Stop and Search have on your relationship with the police? I don't know which one of you wants to start with that. Do you want to start with me?
The only time the impact it's had on me is the only time I would go to a police officer is if I've travelled somewhere that I'm not familiar with, and I don't know, my battery has died, and I'm looking for a specific road. I'll go to them and ask them for directions. I wouldn't really go out of my way to speak to any of them in my local area, even because they don't, if you talk to them, they don't respond in a way where you feel calm. You always feel on edge, basically. So the impact it's had on me is I wouldn't really go out of my way to speak to them.
I think that's a tricky question for me, because it sort of assumed that there was a relationship to impact. Like one of my colleagues before spoke earlier about how the police don't even say go into a shop and say hello, or go into the community area and just check out what everyone's doing. You know what I mean? There is no built relationship to impact. The Stop and Search has no real effect on my relationship with the police because I don't have a relationship with the police. And that is, in some sense, part of the problem with feeling comfortable in my own home.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you think particular communities feel more this way than other communities?
I cannot speak for my own community. I'm not sure about that question.
You've got friends in various different communities. Does everybody feel the same way in your areas?
Well, considering that all three of us are from different communities, and I feel this way, and they too, then
do you feel
I
the
guess
same?
I
The
agree
same way?
completely.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And just to add that outside of research evidence would show also that similar levels of lack of trust, confidence, and the disproportionate nature and the over-policing and under-protection is also applicable to Gypsy, Traveller and Roma communities as well. But we're not discussing that today. But that's just to answer the question that are there any other communities involved? And yes, there are.
And do you think the communities that are particularly stopped and searched, the BAME communities, do you think it's mainly the BAME communities that are feeling that they have this feeling?
Yeah, I'd say yes, because even if it's not me or it's not my friends, if I'm walking past, the majority of people I see get stops and searches, the BAME groups or yeah.
I think this is isn't this, no one has a relationship with police anymore. It's not just, they're completely reactive, it seems to me. I don't know, sorry, I'm just my own perspective. Completely, I don't have a relationship with police. They're never around. They're never there. You know, I live in Woolwich. It's the same thing. It's just, they're never there.
We're at this situation, it is for the police to keep us all safe. Black boys are particularly vulnerable in as much as they are disproportionately victims. So something has to be done. I mean, this has to be highlighted because something has to happen in the BAME communities to stop these atrocities that are happening. So what do you think, and it's the police that are responsible for keeping us safe, so what do you think that they could do to give you more confidence in them in order that they can then try and keep you safe, because that's what we've got to find an answer to. What could they do that would make you feel happier around stop and search? Because there's no doubt that does get knives and firearms off the street. So what could they do to give you more confidence in that? Or is there something you think that could replace it? Because something has to be done. We can't carry on as we are now. So we're looking for answers or suggestions from answers from you. Deji.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this as well for the last few years, and actually I've come to another conclusion. I think first and foremost, the police and everybody needs to acknowledge, especially in the BAME community, that people have suffered trauma. You know, they've suffered, you know, police brutality, the way that disproportionality in terms of stop and search, death in custody, you know, even just normal interactions, provocations, you name it. And actually what's been happening is that rather than acknowledging that there's been an issue before, we need to put our hand up, then there needs to be healing that takes place in the community on both sides. The police need to heal, the community need to heal. We need to acknowledge that we didn't get it right back before, and we need to acknowledge that. We need to go through a healing process, and then together we need to come up with a new way of which we want to be policed as a community, working alongside with the police, not the police telling us what they're going to do or vice versa, but everybody coming together in a table, similar to how we are today, and having an adult-to-adult conversation. The problem is we've just been, you know, putting a plaster over some cracks that have taken place, and then expecting there to be change. Look, my first interaction with the police was a negative one. You know, and I'm hoping, I have a son, I'm hoping that his first interaction with the police will be positive. Exactly. I'm hoping he doesn't get stopped and searched first. But if you've been stopped and searched first, or you've been pushed up against a police car, or your parents have gone through that, how do you expect me to feel?
It's something that's passed on through the different generations in these BAME communities, so it's a very hard subject to change. If this is something your parents have experienced, your parents' parents have experienced, it's something that's just been passed through generations and generations in these similar communities.
And we've never had an apology. There's not been an apology to say, look, we've sussed laws, or, you know, we've got it wrong there. Actually, we've learned from it, and this is what we're going to implement. No, what happens is we get told we're going to do this and we're going to do that. But you know, so without the acknowledgement to say that you've seen some of the areas in policing, how can the community feel confident?
Okay, so how would the police send a signal then to, I mean, if it's inbred with you more or less because it's happened to your parents and et cetera, and you've admitted it goes on and on generation after generation, we absolutely have to find an answer to this for the sake of all your mums that send you out thinking, my God, are they going to be safe when they go out there? The fact that kids go out with knives because they think that will make them safer. We absolutely have to put a stop to that. So from the communities, different communities, what would you say to the police? How can we put a stop to this absolute devastation that's going on the streets of London? What would you say, in your opinion, was the answer? Because we've got to find answers.
In terms of building a better relationship with the police, it's not something that can happen over a short period of time. As you said, like, because it's inbred into these individuals in these BAME communities. So I think, like we said, having a better presence in a community rather than having a negative presence in a community, in terms of people not having, when they're seeing police, the first thing they're thinking is, okay, I feel safe now, rather than thinking, oh, what's going on, or am I going to get stopped, or I don't want to go that way, the direction they headed in. So it's about bringing that positive presence into the community rather than a negative one.
It's interesting because you did say earlier that you actually feel safer if there's a police officer there, if there's a couple of gangs. So there's a conflict within yourself really there, isn't there? You're happy to have them there to stop gang rivalry or whatever, but on a one-to-one basis. So it's more on the one-to-one basis there's an issue then.
Yeah. Also, I think, touching on what you said about gang, I think it's quite hard to say what a gang is, because in many of these communities, a lot of these communities are, the communities we're talking about, have built up estates and loads of estates, so the young children grow up together and they hang out in big groups of people, so these people are usually, in my experience, victimised because they're considered to be a gang because they're with a big group of people.
I just think
Go ahead.
I just think we need to have the whole of the police structure. They need to be singing from the same hymn, as it were. So, for example, we have a good relationship with our local officers in Hackney, who are making, every effort to build relationships. But then we have, is it Trident? Yeah, Trident, who come in their vans to kind of, from the police perspective, rescue the day or quash tension. They come in and literally kick bins over and mess things up. From a young person's perspective, police uniform is police uniform. We can't tell the difference between a local officer and someone who's come in from one of their bases outside of the borough. So, we need all of the officers being receptive and sensitive to the community, and it just feels like there's a handful of officers, the one who stand outside the schools. That's who they give us to kind of engage with the community, and then everyone else just carries on as normal. No, and that's not going to work either.
I'd just like to add there, I think I'd really invite the committee members also to think about this issue in a slightly different way, which is if we ask the question that we have to do something about this, yes. But actually, given the levels and the data and the evidence in relation to what extent has it been effective, it actually hasn't. And there has been enough evidence, including the Home Office evidence, even in tackling serious youth violence, it has not been effective. And therefore, I think the serious question we should consider is we shouldn't be discussing stop and search and the use of stop and search in relation to crime. Deji said it earlier, it's an issue of trauma, it is an issue of harm. We have created significant harm that we have not stopped to tackle and to address. We move from one harm to the next, and this discussion and debate on the use of stop and search as a tactic, whether it's useful, it should be used for this crime more than that crime, it's totally detrimental. We're just spiraling, and it would be a really better way of discussing this issue of stop and search if we don't discuss it in relation to crime, which means you asked the question about how do we make it better. The interactions here, how they can be made better, is by asking the police, one, to cut down the levels of stop and search. Number two, to really give evidence, if they're stopping someone, to actually prove, to give a justification. What is the legal justification? What is the moral justification for making that particular stop? Because that's the way we're going to change.
I got two of my colleagues want to come in, but I hesitate to interject, but I think I must. The families that we've had before us here, the Nizam family in particular, they actually want stop and search, done properly of course, but they want more stop and search. I've yet to come across, certainly in my part of East London, families who've lost loved ones or and so on, who don't want a stop and search, as I said, done properly. But I also feel this is the logic of what you're saying. They don't look at stop and search in the context of crime.
Understanding,
look at it in the context of trauma.
It is, yes, it is because the significant amount of trauma that has been created, the gaps in complaints, the issues of trust and confidence.
I understand
when
what
you
you
put
said about
that
trauma,
together,
but it's your words. Don't look at it in the context of crime. That I'm struggling to work out the logic of what you're saying.
It is used in the context of controlling crime, yes. So, bear with me for a second, because although the language is used that it's being used to control crime, when we actually look at the evidence, it hasn't controlled crime enough. It is not effective. The data itself, their own data, Met data and police data, demonstrate that the proportion of arrests, the proportion of fines and detection rates, they're really low.
Yeah,
so we have to understand how is this stop and search power as a tactic being used and applied, because here's the evidence. This is how it is being applied, because we are creating a much more significant series of problems in that way. So therefore, when we talk about stop and search, we should be questioning specific instances of stop and search, how that has been undertaken by the officer, what is the justification for that? And that's where the gaps are actually in practice.
Yeah, in order. Sean, do you want to come in? And then Florence, Samima Shalomi, and then Samima Vittu.
Thank you. Neena, I wanted to ask you a few more questions, because I'm interested in the comments you made right in your introduction about the intersectionality of deprivation and race and the spatial distribution of stop and search across London. As I understand it, I think you said there's a strong correlation between deprivation and stop and search, and that goes beyond the correlation with actual crime levels. Is that right?
So this data, you'll find that in our recent report, which was done by our colleagues at LSE and StopWatch and the Drugs Charity Release. So there are variations between boroughs and that are strongly linked to the levels of deprivation. So there is overall rates of stop and search are highest in the more deprived boroughs, where there's considerable inequality existing already. And the rates of stop and search appear to be more sensitive when you look at the data to deprivation and inequality rather than crime. And I think that's where more research, even more recent research by Paul Quinton and Ben Bradford and Matteo have suggested this exact same thing about the use of stop and search to separate it from crime. Because what we're looking at is actually how this particular power is being used in areas of deprivation and inequality rather than addressing crime. And the concentration of stop and search in boroughs with high levels of deprivation and inequality actually fuels disproportionality. Because if you look at the study, so there are graphs and charts in our report as well, which you're welcome to look at, and I'll send a copy of that to the committee. Disproportionality is highest in the relatively wealthy and affluent boroughs, which is quite interesting. White people are subjected to very low rates of stop and search in such locations, while black people continue to experience heightened rates of intervention even when they're passing through, they don't even live there. And this pattern is consistent actually with ethnic profiling, and because it indicates that black people and black communities are being singled out for for suspicion on that basis. So that's kind of really interesting trends and patterns within the boroughs across London, and it's a really worrying situation.
Yeah,
and add to that the use of stop and search, claiming that it is effective.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of some on-the-ground examples of how that might manifest itself if police were dealing with a particular incident. And I'm just thinking, so say there was a mugging or a series of burglaries going on in an area that wasn't deprived or whatever. If police were meeting the residents of the area on the street and there was a live situation going on, I'm thinking they might go up to those people and say, have you seen anything? And it's really interesting to me that the example you gave, I think it was Jay,
I think that rings true. I've never heard of that in terms of that kind of approach. And actually, a similar situation happened to one of my members from the Stop and Search monitoring group. He literally stepped out and he was searched. He wasn't asked, have you seen anything? He was actually told he fits the description. Actually, what you mentioned earlier. So, yeah, I think that there is a different approach to different areas. It's clear, and that's what I'm trying to allude to. Actually, there's a bigger thing going on here, and we need to get into that and really unpick what that is, rather than just keep doing the same old thing.
Yeah, and so just to continue with the example, so say in that situation you were said, have you seen anything? And if you were talking to the perpetrator, in those circumstances the perpetrator would probably start to act suspiciously, and then you'd have grounds to search them. But it's just coming in with just seeing you there and thinking you might need to be suspicious. That seems to me like that's not a good enough reason. And
that's the heavy-handed approach, and what we've also heard at StopWatch very routinely now, and this has also happened to one of my students at university, where the instant response of the police is to start handcuffing you even before they've started doing anything. That is a really worrying issue, and that's been observed by some of our members, but also equally worrying is how can you actually start handcuffing people? I mean, there are issues. There's some real disregard to civil liberties here, obviously, but it's the manner, and it all speaks to the manner in which police are conducting themselves. I'm not saying all, but this particular issue has come to our attention about police and we'd like to know what's the policy around that. Is there a policy? Is there a procedure which has suddenly changed? We don't know about that. In regular, your questioning is stopping someone for questioning and you handcuff them. I mean, that's really worrying.
So that's it.
Thank you so much for the information and evidence you've been given today. One of the things that I've been discussing with some of the young people in Lambeth and Southwark is around the fact that they feel that the police need a lot more training in terms of unconscious bias, especially when it comes to black men. Some of the people I spoke to said that they feel that there's this stereotype about the fact that specifically black men are aggressive, angry, and with that sort of embedded unconsciousness, when they're going out approaching their job, that's almost sometimes ingrained in them already. So what's your take on some of that training? And also, do you feel that a lot more needs to be done with some of the younger kids who, again, we are seeing more younger children, and we're talking about primary school age children being involved in drugs and criminal activity. At what age do you feel that we should start building up that relationship with young people and the police?
Earliest as possible. I feel like, from time year one, I feel, because the earlier you get them to work together or like speak to each other, and I think there will be a better understanding. And as they, through the years, even though they might have come across bad experiences with some policemen, they will still see or still remember that there are good policemen out there, and I think even the way the training is, I think if police had like a bit more of like communication training when speaking to young people, instead of approaching them like they've automatically done something wrong, I feel that will help as well. But yeah, I think having them from as early as possible, year one maybe, in primary schools.
I'm confused. Is your question At what age should...
So in terms of helping to address some of that community engagement, community tensions, do we need to start looking at relationships with the police from a much younger age? So it's not until, as Deji said, your first experience with the police is a negative one, but actually, should we be trying to boost up more support of police going into schools, youth clubs? Do you feel that's working? There's a great campaign, which I'm sure some of you have seen, 56 Black Men, in terms of challenging that stereotype. To say, actually, just because I'm in a hood, it doesn't mean I'm associated to a gang. How do we change some of that mindset, which unfortunately is with some officers?
Yeah, I think that's definitely effective, getting them involved in youth clubs and secondary schools as soon as possible. I think also with sort of like community checkups, so just a police officer knocking on your door and sort of just speaking to a parent can be potentially more effective than getting them into a school, because then you've got that experience being passed down to the children at whatever age, but as long as it's coming from a trusted source, then it might be more effective. And I think with the sort of challenging the unconscious bias, you can challenge it with the method I just described, or with actually lead sergeants or lead officers scrutinising their team. Because when Deji and I went into our local police office, one of the officers had taken it upon themselves to scrutinise each member because he was quite high up, so he would scrutinise them following a specific method. I think he might have called it like the hand technique or something, where it was like an acronym for like ways that you should approach stopping people. And what he found out was that lots of officers would actually jump to the conclusion of stopping and arresting someone with the wrong premises. And so he would be challenging that on a regular basis. So on top of the method one of getting officers to get more involved in the community, you've also then got internal challenges of the unconscious bias. But I think the second one is potentially more effective than the first.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, just quickly, briefly, yeah. So definitely, I think if you up to about 6, 7, if you speak to young people, they like the police. They've got no reason not to like the police. Actually, they're driving around with police cars and all sorts of things. Actually, so what we need to do is get to them when perception starts to change. The unconscious bias training is key. I think, and that can't be done by a Met officer, because all training is all done by officers. It needs to be done by somebody outside who understands and gets it, because unconscious bias is playing a key role in policing. You're hearing the stats from Neena, and I think some of those officers, they will say, I don't have a particular bias, but you.
It's evident.
But it's evident, obviously, in the way that you're policing. So I think we need to be braver, and I think we need to be open to have these discussions. And I still think, it was in the Stephen Lawrence report about institutional racism. It's still there. Let me call it out. Actually, what has been done to really address that? We need to really go back to that report and actually look back and say, are we addressing these things? Because some of that institutional racism is what we're seeing play out in some of the interactions that we've been talking about.
Just very quickly then, because I'm under pressure, do you think there's, I absolutely agree with that, but do you think there's an unconscious bias against the police just because they're police from some of the communities?
Well, I think what there is the trauma, so we did ask this in the summer with a group of young people. Some young people haven't had an experience with the police, but they have a negative perception of the police because it comes from their parents. Okay. So yes, so you're right. Some of that has come from the family, and I guess that's why we need to go through this process.
So we need to find the answer to all of that, because we've got to for sure find something. I've got 2 very quick ones which I have to ask. I should think that they're easily answered and quickly. What can the police do to encourage communities? No, I've done that, beg your pardon. How can people find out about their rights with regards to stop and search? And are there gaps in the information available about people's rights? And if so, how can we fill those gaps ever so quickly?
Okay, so can I take that and Deji can add to that? So yeah, there are definitely gaps, and I know at different points in time the police and the Met, they have tried to provide information about know your rights and campaigns and so on.
Yeah.
But I think I'd be with Deji there and also yourself in terms of looking at community organisations as the conduit, local community organisations that actually help with that engagement process. Police should not shoot down into the local schools and start kind of doing engagement, because that's not helpful. If at all, that is a regressive move. It should be done and mediated through experienced organisations that are actually doing the work. So we do have, even at StopWatch, we have pages and sections that outline. We provide information, work with a range of community organisations providing information on how to complain. So we produced the Complaints Guide in 2016 based on consultation with community members, with young people. Also, we produced the Guide for Parents and Children in 2017. So these are sections, ways in which we can inform communities and make them better aware of what the rights are. At the moment, like we heard earlier in relation to the body video, worn videos as well, there isn't enough information coming from the police themselves as to what is the right procedure. And based on that, the rights then become more clear.
I know they have produced lots and lots of leaflets. It's probably how they're getting them out to you, and that should be looked at. Thank you, Chair.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to pick up on this point, back in November, the Commissioner of the Met Police told us that in many of our schools, young people are given really good explanations of both Section 1 and Section 60. So wondering, perhaps to Jay and Derreem, were you taught about those rights in school, and where do you think would be the best setting to be informed about those rights, and who should provide it?
I've never experienced being informed of those rights in school, and I went to 2 schools as well, and that wasn't the case in either of them. And also, I think in terms of getting that education across to young people, I think the police need to partner up with people who do have that solid relationship with those young people. So if they do partner with those people that have that solid relationship, there's that connection where the police can pass on that information to those people who have that relationship, and they can partner up and do this in local community like youth clubs or other areas where young people gather.
But you didn't have that at school, did you?
No, I didn't have anything like that in school, but I do think it would be a good idea if it was part of the curriculum in school. Yes. Knowing your rights. It's something everyone needs to know. So why not hide it, but why not distribute it in a way where all the young people could get it in a...
It's compulsory.
Yeah, make it compulsory.
I think diversify distribution and have it in schools, but don't rely on it being in schools.
But you're not aware particularly of the police delivering it in schools?
It did not happen in my school.
No.
I learned from my youth club.
Yeah, that's helpful, thank you.
Peter, and then I got one question.
I'm just carrying on from
You can speak up a bit.
Sorry?
Speak up a bit.
Sorry, just carrying on from what Ian said earlier. Can I ask you two gentlemen, because you're part of, you're monitoring it, just on a basic principle level, do you see the need for stop and search? That sounds like a really dumb question to ask at this point, but I think it's crucial. Do you think that stop and search is necessary? Not whether you think it's being done right, whether you think it is, or would you want to see it abolished?
A simple answer is yes. Stop and search is needed because young people will say, there are some young people or individuals carrying stuff. So yes, I think to abolish it completely, I don't think would be the right move. But yes, I just think it just needs to be done properly and it needs to make sense. And I think where it's targeted on particular groups, that's when it becomes a problem. But yes, you do need stop and search. You can't not have it.
Like, I understand why you would suggest that, but it is a tool for finding out more information. If you have reason to suspect someone, you then use the tool to find out more information. It's necessary in that sense, but it only works in a very specific way. So it's about finding those conditions.
You don't. Right, I see. So you're not against the principle of it as such?
No, the execution.
Fair enough. So clarify that. That's all.
I'll have one more question and then we move to the next section. Neena, you talked quite rightly, in my opinion, about the need to get information out through community organizations and working with community organizations. See, this debate actually started back in 81, or before that maybe, but certainly 81. Many of us, some of us remember the Brixton riots, uprisings, disturbances, what you want to call it, and stop and search was a key factor. And we had this, much before McPherson, when some of us came into politics, we had the Scarman inquiry, which recommended, and in fact, police consultative groups were set up. The Police and Criminology Act of 84. Today, we have independent monitoring groups. We have various community events, safer neighborhood boards. So are these structures not working?
In some, I think
this is 40 years, nearly 40 years, coming up to 40 years from Scarman's inquiry in 81, 82.
Absolutely, and I've personally also been looking into this issue. To what extent have scrutiny groups monitoring been effective? So there are periods when they are effective, when we all come together and really wish to make a change and do effective work. And then there are moments after we establish the structures, then it depends on different boroughs, if you're talking just about London, where the chairs of certain monitoring groups are imposed forever. There's no change in, where are the changing faces? Where are the young people who are engaging in those community monitoring groups? I think there is a real problem in relation to then creating structures which then just become bureaucratic exercises in themselves. So I think we need to change that, and that's why I'm not surprised that you haven't seen any change, because that in itself has become the embedded nature of the working of these monitoring groups. So we need to be more proactive, making sure that monitoring groups actually, one, work effectively, two, that the data is provided to them in an effective and kind of timely manner. Three, training. I mean, we at StopWatch have been saying that in monitoring groups, young people who join monitoring groups, please get the training, understand how disproportionality should be understood in your local area, in your local context. So these are some of the things I'd highlight in relation to monitoring groups. Yeah.
Thank you. Of course, of the time we could carry on with this discussion, but we can move to the third section, which is the use of Section 60, to be led by my colleague, Member Disma, and then I think another Tony Deverish might wish to come in after that.
Okay, well, Neena, perhaps we'll start with you. What's your views of how Section 60 is used in London?
So the Section 60 searches, so there's a real interesting history about Section 60 searches, as you may be aware. It increased dramatically with the introduction of Operation Blunt in 2008 across London. It was an anti-knife crime operation, and the Home Office Tackling Knives Action Plan. The evaluation of these projects actually showed no measurable impact on on reducing the levels of knife crime at all. So from between 2005 and 2010, the use of Section 60 rose more than 300% generally, but for black people, it rose by 650%. This was some information that was analysed at StopWatch. And we, at StopWatch, we undertook some research and found that in 2010, black people were 23 times more likely to be stopped and searched under Section 60. And so the Met also tightened the use of its power. The 2013 review, as a result of which the bus scheme emerged, led to even a tighter authorization of the regime, which limited the use of this power in the area, in local areas. So the use of Section 60 has seen a dramatic dip since the review of the Home Office review in 2013, and since 2014 it has come down. However, looking at the most recent data, again, it's worrying that since 2014, from 2014 till 2016, we saw significant reductions, in the use of the use of Section 60 in police powers. But from then on, I think, and it's been further reduced, but 17, 18, actually, there has been a rise again. And I'm sure this is responding to the usual kind of theme of knife and gang-related activity. And in the London region itself, there were 1,838 uses of Section 60 stops and searches. However, and the arrests, total arrests made on that was a very small proportion. So I think there is, again, a question that you may bring the use of this power, but we actually haven't learned from previous mistakes where Section 60 was called out as being extremely problematic. The issue went all the way to the European Court, to our Supreme Court as well. And I think bringing back, but also calling at the same time about, on the other hand, also reducing the threshold for suspicion, put together, these two things are really worrying. So I'd watch Section 60 because it seems to be on the increasing trend again, and we don't understand why, because the manner in which it is being used and what it is resulting in as an outcome is very, very small. But on the other hand, the other problems that it creates, we have brought that back into the mix again, which is poor confidence and trust in exactly those communities that we are discussing.
Okay, can I go on to the last issue, and I want to come back to some other issues about this, and that's when I've seen Section 60 used in Camden, for example, it's been round maybe one or two wards, and it's been after a serious incident where people have been stabbed, murdered, shot at, and brought in like that. And Section 60 has been used primarily to try and put a lid on tit for tat. So it's difficult to prove what would have happened if you didn't have the Section 60. Would there have been warfare on the streets if they hadn't had, and bringing extra officers as well, that goes with the Section 60. So has it been effective in trying to stop tit for tat between different gangs?
I think if police are responding to a situation that is live, it's happening, and there's an immediate response for which they have not only intelligence but some really important information, absolutely the use of that, but alongside informing community members that they're going to be applying, using the bus scheme effectively, and using all of those, the triggers, explaining the use of the search, applying it in that area. It has happened in Brent as well, in some other areas across London as well. Absolutely good. If you follow that, then the likelihood is that people will understand what it is being used for, and it has been appropriately explained, and the community is behind you. The problems have been when it has just been slapped down and there's a shutdown, people are just indiscriminately stopped and searched, not much information is given. We're all human beings, we want to know what the hell is happening. So I'm
going to come on to the information and how it's spread in a minute, but just getting back to Section 60, what you're saying is, the circumstances I've just outlined, and I don't think it's been used in Camden, which is one of my boroughs, in circumstances where it's not been as a result of something horrible happening, so long as it's explained to people know what's going on, that's okay from your point of view.
Absolutely. I mean, and the bus scheme, gives you all of those key points. Yeah. The problem again is when it's not being done properly. So what evidence is there that Section 60 has been used not in response to very clear intelligence or of something happening or something about to happen, as opposed to just doing it for the sake of doing it? Does that actually happen, and how often, and where in particular? Currently, I don't have information on that, and nobody has said that it has happened, in an indiscriminate manner. It is simply based on what we are saying is that it has to be actually explained properly, because that is would be the good basis of applying Section 60 and using previous research, but also looking at, because it is a suspicion-less search. So if you're applying it and using it, the police actually have to be very, very careful. So the onus lies on them, not for us. We are just seeing the fallout and then trying to make sense of it, that what could have been done better here.
Yeah. Well, certainly Section 60 has got to be authorised quite high up the food chain.
Yes.
And for a limited period, and usually, certainly in my experience, for a relatively limited area, not a whole borough slapped at. So perhaps I'll come to Jay and Green and ask you, and Oluwatosin, ask you, what experience have you had of Section 60, if any? Do you know what Section 60 is, for example? I don't know. Okay. Well, Section 60 is a very specific police power that enables the police to stop and search people without having to have any reason for doing so, but usually because there's been a very serious incident or or a serious incident, they've got very clear intelligence it's going to happen. But you've got no direct experience of that.
I have had experience with it, of being stopped and they're telling me, it's an example of when something's happened in the area, right? So when something extreme has happened, yeah. I have had experience of it, but I don't feel like, my personal opinion is, if something's happened in the area, they should have enough evidence to have some kind of idea of who or where this has happened, or some form of explanation of where they should stop these people, if you understand what I mean, rather than just leading to, I'm just going to go and just try to knock down everyone in the area, I'll stop everyone I can until I find someone or some evidence in relation to the incident that occurred.
I was thinking from the police's point of view, they'd also say it's a deterrent effect to stop something happening rather than necessarily investigating what has happened. I don't know, Deji, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment, just like Neena says, in Hackney, for example, we have seen Section 60s go on a slight rise. But even though there's been a rise in the number of Section 60s, in terms of actual searches, there haven't been that many that's been taking place. So for us, at the moment, we are just watching what's going to happen, really. I think our main concern was that we didn't have the free-for-all that we had before 2011, because it did feel like a free-for-all where every person was just being stopped. It does seem at the moment to be measured, and it's not a free-for-all at the moment. My thing would be, again, is that communication piece to the community. Often it's been done, and we find after it's been implemented.
Yes.
It'd be nice to know before you're about to do it, so that at least people are aware, especially if it's going to do what you want it to do, which is to be a deterrent. And it's good to let people know.
So, I mean, when there's a Section 60 that's been in my area, I usually get an email from the police who've just introduced a Section 60 or we've just applied for a Section 60 to let you know the area that we're covering. So I get that email. I think other people on the Safe Neighbourhood Board get that email, or Twitter or something like that. Yeah. How do you think it should be communicated? How do you think it is communicated?
I get the same email. I put my hand up. I just think, why can't they stick it on their website, their social media? Because for us, you're limited to your network, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you want the whole borough to be aware where you're living. So for me, is there a clever way of making sure that everybody knows? Maybe text messages or something. You know, so that it should go a lot wider than just the Safer Neighbourhood.
Oh, of course it should. I mean, I'm not disputing that. Yeah. I mean, to have a deterrent effect,
I agree.
For it to have a deterrent effect, people have to know it's happening. Yeah. Otherwise, there's no deterrent. You know, it's like nuclear weapons. There's no point in having a nuclear deterrent if the people don't know you've got them. Because it's going to deter anybody.
If I may, just to point out that in the recent figures of Section 60, I'm looking at 1,838 were applied. Only on 63 people did they find any offensive weapons. So if they're applying it for this kind of a reason, things that you've just outlined. But the problem there, again, is that out of those 1,838 people, 811 were from black groups. So again, we see the disproportionate, it's how it is also being applied, and who are the people in that Section 60 area who are being stopped and searched. Within this is also the hidden problem of stop and account, which again, it's something that, given that the Lawrence Inquiry Recommendation 61, there's been, in terms of, have we progressed? No, we haven't, because even on that one, we have gone back, because the Met, without any consultation with their communities, decided to roll back on that as well, the recording and monitoring of that. So I think there are some, we are glad that the use of Section 60 has been drastically curtailed, which is wonderful. You have more safeguards around it, and, the requirement for, authority given from a much higher level. However, even when it's been on a slight increasing trend at the moment, we are seeing the same story again in relation to it being applied more disproportionately on black groups than other groups. So I think, again, going back to the deterrence, example, deterrence is only, in relation to the punishment or the speed of punishment and how it's applied and how it's received. It only has a very small impact. the issue really is that, you know, it's only limited for that period of time, because if people want to stash away their knives or, you know, hide something, they would have already done it. You know, it's gone. So again,
but the police would say, look, somebody's just been stabbed from Gang A. Gang A is therefore going to want to retaliate against Gang B. By flooding the air with officers with Section 60 powers, we take some of the heat out of that, let things cool down a bit, and then we can try and move forward from there. If we don't do that, so you know, it's a bit like trying to prove a negative with Section 60. What we don't know is what would have happened had there not been a Section 60. Would have had World War III on the streets, or would nothing have happened anyway? We just don't know.
So it's the use, definitely. It's a power that the police have. They use it. You know, it's a valid use of the power when there is a reason for doing so. But it's about the application, and it's about engaging with the community. I think that communication is vital.
So it's basically using social media is the only really way to get it out, I suppose.
One way. I don't think it's the main way.
How do you think it should be got out other than social media? If it's going to happen, bear in mind usually it's only for 12 hours or so.
No, yeah, there's
very rarely more than 24 hours.
Say for example, on a estate, they might you get these like notice boards, or like in a park local to an estate, you get these notice boards, and if you just put up like a little leaflet just saying this is what's happening in the area, this is what the police is going to do or whatever, and because I look at, I know a lot of young people as well look at these notice boards because they want to see what's going on in the area, whether it's to do with police, whether it's to do with something they like. So there are different ways than just social media. It's just about how to get out there for the young people to see.
Bearing in mind it's just for 12 hours or 24 hours.
Yeah, if it's for 12 hours, you put it there you put it on the notice board and then take it down. Say if I see it, and I'll be inclined, to tell my friends this is what's going on, and you know, so it would work.
I think text message is the way to get out.
But that assumes that people you want to get to know are on following the Met text, doesn't it?
Yeah, but not everyone might be in use of, might have data, for instance, or even be connected to the Met social media. But through text, it's a more just unified method of communication.
And also because young people are less likely to follow the Met on Twitter and Instagram.
I think some of our colleagues have been waiting very patiently to come in. So if I can start off in order that I saw my colleagues, Susan, Tony, and then I think Shani wanted to come in as well.
Okay, thanks. Neena, you intimated that Section 60s are put in for no good reason in instances. Can you send this committee some evidence of that? Because certainly I can speak the same as Andrew. I've been involved in when they've been put in. They have, the ones I've known about have been put in because of something drastic that has happened, and the police want to calm things down in the local community. It is done very, very quickly by a very senior officer. Yes. It can't just be put in willy-nilly. So the trouble is, please. The trouble is, if people are listening to you and listening to you say they're just put in, then they'll believe that. And so if we can have evidence of that, and then we can take the police to task if that is the case, because it shouldn't be done. But I have never seen evidence of that. I've seen it go out, consultation with the groups that you can. And the point was well made by Andrew. The problem is these things go in very, very quickly in order to calm situations down. So that there's not more bloodshed, which on occasions there has been. And it is vital that it's done quickly. And if Section 60 is put into place, then that senior officer has the ability to get other officers in to help the situation. And in an earlier question, you said that actually you feel safer if there's a police officer around. And they can do that. And their prime objective is to stop more violence on the street. So if you have evidence that that's not happening, then please do let us know. It could be that if you've got a disproportionate amount of black lads being stopped on one of the one of these Section 60s. It could be that you've got two black gangs against each other, and therefore the stop and search there. So these figures can be spoken about, but actually sometimes you need to delve into why these things happen. And I think communication, it keeps coming out, communication is absolutely vital, because the police do things for a reason. If perhaps our different groups of people understood why they did them, challenge if that's not right, but if you actually understood why it was done, then perhaps that would start to ease the community tensions within the police. So perhaps you'll send us the evidence of that.
What I was suggesting was looking at the data that every Section 60 is obviously authorised at a very high level following the guidance given by the Home Office. I was merely suggesting in instances where people feel that why was it applied, because nothing was found based on, the proportion of, what was actually found as a result of putting that. If that is explained and monitoring groups understand that, then that's the point I was making.
You're a monitoring group, and I'm saying to you, if you have any evidence, then let us know.
Sure.
If not, I don't think we should be suggesting that the police would just do it willy-nilly, because that doesn't help with community relations.
Absolutely.
No, it doesn't. So please find evidence so that the police can answer to that, if in fact there is anything they have to answer to. Thank you.
Tony?
I wanted to come back to the point that several of you made near the beginning, really, in terms of community engagement. And as Peter said, there's not an awful lot of engagement because the police the numbers may have been cut, they're just running around London doing their job. Certainly, again, the chair mentioned the 1981 riots that I'm old enough to remember, where football was particularly used after the riots to try and get out there and talk to people, when I was your age. Do you guys ever invite your local police to any community events yourself? Has anybody in your community that you know of ever asked them to come to something like a football match or something, or even for funding to set up a six-side football tournament? Or have they ever tried to engage with you and met in terms of community, individually or people that you know?
Personally, there's this organisation that I used to work with in Islington, and they help young people that's had disadvantaged backgrounds. They've invited the police a few times to a couple of their events and showcases, and the police hasn't turned up. I don't know why. But I know they haven't turned up. But on other cases, and on the other side to that, when you asked, do they engage with us? No, there's me personally. No, they haven't come to me and tell me about it. And I don't know. They haven't tried to communicate or try to engage with any young people within my area.
I think with some of the work that we do. We've got like a quite good relationship with our local officers, where they come in and they walk us through the stop and search procedure, walk us through some of their arsenal, and we have set up plans to get the police officers better engaged with the community. So we have a list of certain events that are going to take place, and we have, I guess, sort of come to an agreement with some of the officers and explain that we would like them to take part in, say, this event and so on and so on. But that's in the process of being executed. But until then, no.
Yeah, just following on from what Oluwatosin is saying, I think very much we do have a good relationship with our police in Hackney. I think in terms of engagement, it's very peaks and troughs. And it really does depend on, a lot of the time, it depends on the senior officers who are currently in charge, formerly borough commanders, now BCUs. I think if they have a passion to have community engagement, that is filtered down to the officers, they engage. If you have a commander that doesn't really care, then they disengage. And so what we lack is a bit of consistency. When it happens, it works really, really well. Football is a great icebreaker. Anything like that, where it moves the subject away from some stop and search, and actually it's about the person, but it's not consistent enough, and that's what I would advocate for.
Thank you very much.
And I think with the reorganisation of the boroughs as well, I think particularly engagement is going to become even more challenging because it's the areas that people now have to cover. I've spoken to police officers who are struggling, it's engagement and they're being pulled in many different directions. So it is challenging.
But I think what is also something I've noticed is the effort for police engagement is made from our organisation, an organisation that its fundamental service is for the community. But at other meetings or other organisations, say it's an organisation that's sort of run by members of the community that aren't necessarily there to, they aren't being paid to provide a service to the community, they won't try and make the efforts with the engagement to the police. So I'm saying that the engagement is only made by an organisation that is specifically there to provide a service for the community. But from members of the community, they are not making the engagement, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Shanti, would you come in?
Yes, please. I have a slightly legal question, which I'm hoping either Neena or Deji might know. When a Section 60 order is in place, is it the case that all the searches that take place in that area are then carried out under Section 60, or do the officers have the discretion to use Section 60 powers, or the usual ones, in each individual search?
Actually, I'm not too sure. My understanding would be that if Section 60 is in place, because that's actually, I would say, it's a greater power, they would just enforce.
They would just use those powers, wouldn't they? I would have thought, yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to ask was, you've mentioned that the overall levels of searches under Section 60 is not going up to levels that it was when it was previously used an awful lot.
Yeah.
The number of Section 60 orders overall is also not above the level it was back in 2011 or 12. One thing that members of the Assembly have been asking about, though, is the number of times it's used on a borough-wide basis. And I know Assembly Member Dismore said in Camden it's only used across a couple of wards, but I know of at least 8 occasions in 2018 when it was used borough-wide. And it's been used...
What, in Camden?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Yes, it's in an MQ and yeah,
Well, we can sort that out later.
Yeah, it was on Twitter in November. It's not easy to find them all on Twitter, so I'm waiting for more Mayor's questions to come back. But certainly from in 2018 up to May, the number of borough-wide Section 60s exceeded the whole of 2013. And we've had further data since, so we are way above on the level of borough-wide use. And the questions I think we have here is, we understand its use, it follows, it's a reactive thing, it follows a serious incident, there's a high risk situation, you flood the area with officers to deal with that situation, you need those extra powers for that time. And what we don't understand is what the rationale is for putting the powers in place across a whole borough, because you're not flooding the whole borough with officers. It isn't possible necessarily to do that communication with people about what the powers are. And we are hearing about a few cases where people are being searched in a different area, maybe not even related to that crime, and being told they don't need to be told what the reason, and not understanding because they hadn't heard it was in place. So I just wondered, Neena, do you understand why there might be such an increase in borough-wide use? Obviously, when the officers, some of the senior officers were sort of speculating about relaxing the requirements on the usual powers, my hackles pricked up thinking, well, maybe the use of Section 60 across wider areas might be a way of relaxing the powers instead. And so I have my concerns about this, and I haven't got any conclusions to draw because I'm not really clear from what the police have told us why the use of borough-wide Section 60 is going up quite so much. But I was interested in your thoughts, basically.
Okay, so I think, yes, your speculation, there could be some truth there, because because of the fact that the Section 60, once you've got it, and in response to a very serious incident can be applied, you can do a lot of, conduct a lot of searches. But within that, perhaps, police are also trying to get a lot of intelligence, which they would otherwise not get because the legal safeguards around the use of the other powers is quite tight. And they have to, give the receipt. And there's so much other stuff around that and safeguards. I think in Section 60, once it's applied, you have to, stop. It's a suspicion-less search and respond to the officer asking you the questions. So I think in response, obviously, to very serious incidents that have gone on last year and earlier this year, we therefore see that as a response to addressing the issue. To what extent, I think research has already demonstrated that by using these Section 60 searches, the sudden surge in the use of Section 60 actually does not have any effect on the underlying trend in non-domestic, violent crimes such as knife crime or a shooting and so on. So it's again, it's worrying that the trend is increasing. At StopWatch, it is even more worrying that it is still being disproportionately applied on black people. So the problems are still there. However, I'm not talking down the seriousness of the incidents that they are being responded to. Absolutely. And that's why we have the reason for applying Section 60 in the first place, and therefore the authority, level of authority that is required is also legitimately, validly quite high, and it should be taken really seriously as long as, again, its use is demonstrably explained, justified, and validated to the community members. And I think that's where some of the gaps were when I was suggesting earlier that, that sometimes people just don't know why it has been applied because maybe they haven't. And somebody else, like you've just said, may have the odd experience of being searched and being asked questions when actually that wasn't the purpose of applying Section 60. So it's dependent on those individual interactions that police officers have that could lead to these sorts of conclusions, on a daily basis. What do the young people think about that when they are being stopped? Do they understand the purpose of Section 60 and so on?
We've got some outstanding questions about whether there have been any complaints. It's very much we're still speculating as to what's going on, and we'll keep monitoring it. Would anyone else like to comment on the borough-wide list? I know there's been quite a few borough-wide Section 60s in Hackney.
I feel like it's quite interesting, this Section 60 thing, I think, because I feel like, I don't know, I'm asking a genuine question now because it was on my head when you were speaking. Is a large presence of police not enough? Rather than stopping and searching everyone, if there's just a large presence of police after one of these incidents, is that not enough to prevent a further crime?
And again, we said the number of searches is not rising as much as we would have thought.
In the borough, so just the presence of police, would that not be enough to prevent a further crime?
No, I know you want to come in, but Susan wants to address this point.
The thing is, if you've got rival gangs going for each other, they might be tooled up, basically. And therefore, the stop and search is important because if they're going to attack each other, and we all know it happens because we see the dreadful consequences, it is likely that some of them have knives or worse with them. Therefore, it is, I would suggest, important that stop and search then does go on so that they can take as many weapons off the streets as possible and make it impossible for those two groups to get together and cause yet more mayhem. So that is what I would say to that.
Yeah. We're just continuing to weigh the risk, the benefits and the risks.
Yeah. Pros and cons. I think obviously there are pros and cons of Section 60. So obviously representing Lambeth and Southwark, I've seen a few borough-wide Section 60s, and you would have all seen in the news yesterday a 15-year-old was shot in West Norwood, and I think I'm just waiting for the email from the police to say they'll probably be issuing a Section 60 around that area, because that's the response we've had on the back of some of the incidents. In terms of what my colleague, Assemblymember Hall, was mentioning around some of the issues with the gangs, do you feel that a straight approach or response of saying we're going to have that blanket Section 60 works in stopping some of this, or should we see more police actually present when there aren't any incidents and building up some of that community relations? Because my concern, agreeing with Assemblymember Barrow, is that we are then by default fall into Section 60s when actually let's look at building on that community relation and addressing some of the trauma and distrust with the police.
Sorry, I just think the answer to your question would be the latter. Look, I think sometimes we kind of, I don't know, my tongue's tied now at the moment, but I think it's too simplistic sometimes the method that we employ. So there's been an incident, and so therefore we're going to have a section 60 and we're going to find weapons. Look, to be honest, if someone's going to carry a weapon, they're pretty aware that a section 60 is going to be enforced, and they're not going to be holding the weapon. And often the people who commit these crimes are never the ones who are stopped having those knives in the first place. It's often the people who are there, who are found with the knives. I don't have evidence to corroborate this, who are, who feel they need to hold it as a form of defence. But perpetrators are not going around just holding knives. No, they're very smart in what they do. If they're going to do something, they will stash it straight after. So the likelihood of a police officer finding them with a knife under section 60 is probably highly unlikely. But yes, I think what the point about the police presence is, even if you had two rival gangs, let's just use that as an example, and there was 10 on each side, and you had one officer just outside here, just one officer standing there. What could one officer do? They won't attack each other. They won't attack each other. They wouldn't do that. They have that much respect, and I think sometimes that's the point that we're trying to make. Just that one person can stop an incident, but not having anybody at all, then yes, it's possible that this free-for-all could happen. So that's why I said the point of the visibility and having them around, not just when an incident takes place, but just there. Yes, I think that's a step in the right direction.
Yep. Okay. Should we move on?
Yep. Thank you.
So the last section, and possibly the most important section, the way forward. What needs to change? What message can be sent from this meeting to the mayor and his deputy mayor listening? So if you can ask each of you just one simple question. The shorter answer, the better. But and if you could be as precise as possible, if you could change anything about the way stop and search powers are used, what would it be? If you just want a few seconds to reflect, to think, one thing that you would change about the way stop and search powers are used. As I said, this debate has been going on for some 40 years now, if not longer. And rest assured that everything here is recorded, and it's not been a waste of your time. I was going to say at the end of the meeting anyway. All this will feed into our policy, the deliberations, and it's certainly been very useful so far. But one precise thing, or I'll be charitable, a couple of things that you would suggest that can be done to improve things.
Okay.
Neena, do you want to kick off?
May I? Okay. I think I'd start looking at, as StopWatch, but also as an academic teaching about these things, I think we should start with the lack of moral justification in relation to the extent that this particular powers of stop and search actually impact disproportionately on minority ethnic groups. I think that's the first thing that needs to change. That's why StopWatch came about. And ultimately recognizing and understanding for everyone, including the police officers, that this power is very high, it's highly intrusive, it's deeply humiliating for the person experiencing it. And in the rush of the training and becoming the police officer, let's not lose sight and track of this particular feeling that you are then empowered to impose on a member of the public, and really trying to, one, decrease the number of stops and searches, and providing a valid justification, how it is used, when it is used. And I would also go ahead and say monitoring groups to ask the questions, when are these powers actually used effectively? So gets back driving to the question of, one, effectiveness, and two, to significantly reduce ethnic disproportionality, because despite all these safeguards, despite all the changes, our disproportionality levels are still very high, and that's unacceptable.
So effectiveness, justification, training.
I think for me, mine is connected to clarification. And I think if I was stopped and I've gone through the process, but at the very end of that stoppage, I was then handed a flyer which basically gave me all of the information of, well, let's not say all, but more, it explained my rights and what I am entitled to do when I'm being stopped and searched. If I were then stopped and searched again in the future, I would know exactly how I would like to deal with it, and that's what I would change.
You want to come in, Peter? Should I just go through the panel, or do you want to come in now?
Yes.
Yes, you go.
Can I
Go on.
I was just going to say one thing that seems to come out from what we've all been talking about as a theme is just simply that there should be many more police, much more visible, embedded in the community, neighbourhood policing, wouldn't you say? Isn't this what it is really? That this is what it's all about in the end, that it's just not people coming into situations. Am I right in that?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right. To go back to the question again, so...
Yeah, I agree with...
you finished?
Yeah, all done.
Yeah, I agree with Neena completely. I think she covered the most important things that need to change in regards to the unconscious stereotype and morally stopping people for the correct reasons. Also, I think what's also important is, like he said, is the education of educating the young people on what their actual rights are, educating the people what their rights are and why these searches are being taken, so the young people can have a greater understanding towards the police when these actions are being taken towards them.
I'd say just be clear on why you're stopping a young person, and if they tell you that they haven't done anything wrong, or like I don't know, if they don't look suspicious and you're telling them they look suspicious, I think it's the whole approach, really, and don't stereotype as much, because even one time I had slits in my eyebrows, and that's the reason I got stopped, and that's the reason I got searched, because they thought I was a part of a gang, because I had slits in my eyebrows, and that's not a valid reason, to be honest. So.
Mine, quite simply, in addition to colleagues, is greater community engagement from the top down and down up. So that starts from the commissioner all the way down, not just some, PCO, PCSO, that's who you're going to send along. From the commissioner down, need to be all heavily engaged in community, and they need to value it. It needs to be valued because it's key.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for all that. I really would like to thank you all on behalf of the committee for attending today. Please rest assured that a lot of thinking and planning does go into meetings like this, so we're going to make the most of your time, and I know that you take a time away from your schedule to come here. As I said earlier, it will feed into our deliberations, and certainly, this topic, I'm sure we'll be coming back to it again, but there are many valuable, I think, lessons from today. Your input will be taken very seriously. I know it's difficult to talk about personal circumstances and all that, but applaud you for for coming forward and just saying what you had to say. So moving on, just very briefly, there's a few bureaucratic points. Can we note the actions taken by by myself, by the chair, that's Steve O'Connell, and delegated authority, the reported answers given by guests today, the questions asked by members? Great. Can we also agree to delegate authority to our chair in consultation with party group lead members and Caroline Pitcher, assembly member, to agree any output from today's discussions? Agenda item 5, Police and Crime Committee work program. Can we know the progress on our work program? Noted, thank you. Date of next meeting, which is on Wednesday, the 6th of February 2019 at 10 a.m. in Committee Room 5, which is this room, City Hall. Any other business? No? Okay, in which case I declare the meeting closed.